Hey, it's so good to see you again. Welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. You can call me Mo. That's what everyone calls me. I'm a real estate investor and a broker based out of New York City. In this week's episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about New York City basement apartments, as well as what is an actual basement, what's a cellar, and what does New York City actually consider a legal, rentable basement in New York City for all of my clients and people that are listening in that are thinking about buying like a single family home or a multifamily home that also has a finished basement in it with its own separate entrance. This video is probably going to be very useful for you. So without further ado, let's jump right into understanding more about New York City basement apartments and cellars, whatever else you want to call it. Now, I want to clarify something here before we start onto the video. I am not an architect, I'm not an attorney, so a lot of this information is already publicly available, but as your broker, it's my responsibility to share this information with you in a format that is easily digestible by you. So I hope this actually helps you in your decision-making process. Without further ado, let's jump right into this topic. Now, to start us off with understanding better about New York City basement apartments or cellar apartments, you have to make a couple of key distinctions. Right now, this entire video is going to be very much into the weeds of things because New York City makes a couple of different distinctions between basement and cellars, as well as what's rentable and what's habitable or something that you can occupy. Because in New York City, there's a difference between something that you can rent out and something that you can occupy, especially if it's your own family or yourself that's occupying the basement. Without further ado, just to start us off, New York City makes a key distinction between a basement and a cellar. Now, what I mean by that, in New York City Department of Buildings guidelines and zoning guidelines, a basement has at least 1/2 of its height above the curb level. So when you're walking, in front of a house and you see that the windows are relatively big and you see that at least half of its height is above the curb level, that should tell you that that is a basement and not a cellar. A cellar, not S-E-L-L-E-R, but a cellar, C-E-L-L-A-R, is something that has half of its height below, or I'm sorry, not enough of its height above the curb level. So anything that doesn't meet the criteria for a basement height level, that has at least half of its height above the curb level, then that is a cellar, not a basement. And legally in New York City, you cannot rent or occupy a cellar in any case whatsoever. Doesn't mean if that cellar is completely finished and it has amazing finishings and it's got a heating system and a cooling system, whatever it is, legally you cannot rent it out in the eyes of the law. One rule of thumb that I would say is if you're in a house and you see that the windows look fairly big, it's big enough for you to, sort of crawl your way out of, then that typically what I'm seeing is that typically is going to be a basement. Now, there's a couple of different requirements that you'll have when it comes to actual basements and not cellars when it comes to renting them out. Now, basements in residential properties of all sizes can never really be rented out unless they meet the requirements from the Housing Preservation Department or New York City Department of Buildings for light, air, sanitation, and egress requirements, and these have to be approved by the Department of Buildings, so the New York City DOB. Now, basements in single-family homes or 1 to 2 family homes can be legally occupied. Again, I want to make a key distinction here between occupied and rented or rentable. New York City makes a key distinction here because there's a difference between living in a basement unit versus renting it out for rental income or to someone else that might not be a family member. Now, basements in 1 to 2 family homes, or again, not 3 family homes, 1 to 2 family homes can be lawfully occupied if the room complies with all the requirements from Department of Buildings or Housing Maintenance Code. For example, like minimum room size, that there's a minimum ceiling height of about 7 feet or so, and that the walls, above ground level or as high as ground level had been moisture and damp proofed, so that the water or the moisture doesn't necessarily seep in through the building and affect the health of the overall tenants or anyone that might actually be occupying the space. Again, sorry to mistake my language, or not tenants, but I mean people that are occupying the space. One thing as well that New York City makes pretty clear, if you are occupying a finished basement that meets all the housing maintenance requirements, it has 7 feet ceilings and the room size and everything, if it meets all those requirements and you're legally occupying it, it can only be occupied by the same family or families of the person that owns the building, not necessarily to boarders or renting it out by the room or stuff like that. Now, basements in 1 family homes can legally be rented. Again, pay attention to this because this only applies to 1 family homes, not 2 family homes and above, but single family home basements can be rented out if and only if, of course, the basement, not the cellar, meets the requirements from Housing Maintenance Code. So like 7-foot ceiling heights, the room size requirements, and that, of course, the walls have to be damp and moisture proofed, so moisture from the outside, if there's rain or anything, can't sort of seep in and affect the health of the person that's going to be renting from you. And the basement does have to be occupied by 1 family. So it means you can't have, let's say, for example, tenant A from one family and tenant B from another family. Basically, New York City is trying to stop basement apartments that can be legally rented out from being rented out to people that might be roommates or have different backgrounds or whatever it is. I think maybe it has to do with having some sort of stability, especially for tenants that are coming in from families who might not be able to afford a first floor, second floor, third floor apartments, since typically basement apartments will rent for a little bit cheaper. The one thing to also keep in mind, if you are renting out your basement in a legal one family home and the basement has been legalized and you can rent it out, you have to have at least one window in every single bedroom. So you have to make sure that there's enough adequate ventilation coming in from anywhere, from anyone that might be renting it out. Now, I know this is a lot of information to you, so I'll make sure I include my sources in the description below, but you have to understand, again, the key differences in classifications that New York City DOB makes when it comes to basements versus cellars. Basements can possibly be rented out based on further criteria. Cellars absolutely cannot be rented out. Basements in single-family homes can be rented out if they're met with the different criteria from Housing Maintenance Code, 7-foot ceiling heights, room sizes, windows, all that fun stuff. And they can only be rented out to whole families, not to like single-room boarders or people that are from different backgrounds and roommates renting from each other. And of course, you cannot rent out the basement legally in a two-family home and above, because if you were to do that, the only way to do that is to legally get that unit recognized, and the only way to do that is if you update the CO from a legal 2-family to a legal 3-family, which your zoning in your particular neighborhood might not allow that, or else everyone will be willy-nilly adding more units, and the city might lose control in terms of safety for all people that might be living in those basements. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video because I had a lot of fun making it. I know it's a little bit overwhelming, so please scroll down to the description below where you'll see all the different sources. And if you have more questions, you can always reach out to me. My contact information is below as well. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Bye-bye now.